Pisistratus' rule of benevolent tyranny was not to last forever. His son Hippias took over. The freedoms that the common Athenians had gained under Pisistratus were now stripped away. Life for Cleisthenes had now become increasingly dangerous. For the paranoid dictator knew that it was from here, from the aristocrats, that the greatest threat to his power could come. And Hippias' fears would be proved right. Cleisthenes decided to take his first great gamble. He would try to overthrow Hippias, to gain power for himself and his family. Cleisthenes assembled a conspiracy to overthrow the tyrant. Hippias was trapped in his stronghold, captured and banished from Athens forever. But a world where everyone could seize victory could only make Athens even more unstable. As soon as Cleisthenes gained power, he found that others were conspiring against him. Isagoras was an old friend of the Spartans. The Spartans immediately provided a force of their finest troops to back up Isagoras' bid for power, to help him betray his city. Cleisthenes would leave his city living once again under the hand of a despotic dictator. A dictator who now ruled with the support of the most fearsome power in Greece, the Spartans. But even as Cleisthenes agonized in exile, Athens was rocked by an extraordinary event. Like their mythical heroes, the ordinary people of Athens now took their destiny into their own hands. They rose up in revolution. The year was 508 BC. This would be Athens' first step to empire and glory. For the first time in recorded history, the people had turned on their rulers and seized power for themselves. Cleisthenes was recalled from exile and asked to build a government. In the early 5th century BC, the Persians were the greatest power on the world stage. At the head of their empire sat Darius, known to the Greeks only as the Great King. Suppliants had to cover their mouths in his presence, just to avoid tainting the air he breathed. For Phidippides and the democratic Athenians, conquest by Darius and the Persians would mean the destruction of their entire way of life. The Persian force landed at a sandy bay called Marathon, just 26 miles from Athens. News of the invasion spread through the streets like wildfire. This was a city without a standing army. Every male citizen would have to come to the defense of his state. The poorer citizens have spears, sticks, bows and arrows, whatever weapons they can find. But the heart of the Athenian force would be the hoplites, men who could afford heavy bronze armor, a shield, a spear, a sword. The Athenians would field a small but determined force. But as they faced the Persians on the battlefield, the Athenians held out little hope of victory. They were outnumbered by 2 to 1. Phidippides' desperate mission was to run for help from one of Athens' local rivals, the Greek state of Sparta. Even as he ran, Phidippides must have imagined the horror that his fellow Athenians now faced. Fired by the terror that his fellow citizens were being slaughtered, he ran 140 miles in just 2 days. But Pheidippides' quest would end in failure. Help would be refused. He was left only with the knowledge that his fellow Athenians would have to fight alone. The Athenians slaughtered over 6,000 Persians in one fateful day. The world's first democracy had survived its first great test. The Athenians returned to their city to celebrate their victory. But amongst them was one for whom the war with Persia had only just begun. Themistocles had learnt the skills of leadership here, the Democratic Assembly of Athens. From this very podium, Themistocles would now show himself to be one of history's greatest leaders, the savior of his city. For Themistocles alone recognized that the Persians might still be a danger, and that next time victory for the Athenians might not prove so easy. Themistocles began to form a bold new strategy, employing the most advanced weapon of the day, the trireme. Themistocles convinced the Athenians to build the greatest naval force in Greece, a force of 200 triremes. And not a moment too soon. The great Persian king Darius died in 486 BC, and his son Xerxes assumed his father's throne. Xerxes' first action was to vow vengeance for his father's defeat at the hands of the Athenians.
On my father's behalf, and on behalf of all my subjects, I will not rest until I have taken Athens and burnt it to the ground.
Xerxes began to gather his forces. He conscripted troops from every corner of his empire: Arabians, Egyptians, Phoenicians, as well as Persians. Rumors began to leak back to Athens that Xerxes' army numbered nearly 2 million men, that it was the greatest force the world had ever seen, that soon it would be ready to march. And then finally, in the spring of 480 BC, news reached Athens. The Persian army had set out for Greece. History records that Xerxes' troops drank rivers dry. Trampled fields to the raw earth, ravaging the land as they marched on towards Greece. Xerxes was confident of victory. When the Greeks realized that the Persians were invading again, terror gripped the whole country. For the Athenians, who knew that they would be Xerxes' first target, it seemed that this could only be the end. As panic gripped the city, they turned desperately to their gods. They sent a messenger to the oracle to find out their fate. But as the Athenians walked up this path 2,500 years ago, their question was simple and grave. What could they do to save themselves? The oracle's response could not have been more negative.
Why sit you, doomed ones? Fly to the ends of the earth. All is ruin, for fire and the headlong god of war shall bring you low.
When this message came back to Athens, the Democratic Assembly dissolved into uproar. It seemed that even the gods had deserted them. Themistocles' plan was daring. Avoid a conflict on land and fight the Persians at sea. He ordered the evacuation of Athens for the first time in her history. This order for evacuation, carved into a stone tablet for public display, is still preserved, discovered in the back of a Greek coffeehouse. With Athens abandoned, Xerxes' mighty force entered the city. Themistocles sent his servant to Xerxes with a seemingly traitorous message.
The Greeks are afraid and are planning to slip away. They're squabbling with each other and will offer no opposition. You have at this moment an opportunity of unparalleled success.
So eager was Xerxes for a crushing victory, he was happy to believe Themistocles' ploy. Only as the dawn rose did the Persians realize the true nature of Themistocles' plan. They discovered the Greeks not in disarray, but ranged in a battle line across the narrows in front of them. The Persian fleet had been lured so far up the straits that it had no room to maneuver. The powerful Greek triremes bore down on them without mercy. Xerxes himself watched the carnage from his golden throne placed on the shore. At the end of the battle, the Persians had lost 200 ships. For the Greeks, it was a stunning and conclusive victory. Themistocles' triumph was complete. He had persuaded the Athenians to build a navy. He had convinced them to sacrifice their entire city to bring them victory at sea. His instincts had been proved right. He had defeated the greatest empire of the day. And he had now placed Athens in a position where she could build an empire of her own.